Okay. All right. Well, I'll go ahead and get started with these. That's okay. Okay. Hopefully can everyone hear me okay? It sounds like it's still a bit quiet. It's a little bit? All right. And hopefully those online can hear me okay. They can. Okay. Thank you so much. All right. So let's call this meeting to order. This is the March 20th meeting of the Outdoor Adventure Commission. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to look at the agenda. We do have, I'm assuming, a quorum here. We've got quite a few members here, and as well as folks both in the room and online. So thanks everyone for joining. First item on the agenda is welcome and public comment. I don't know if we have anyone here from the public that would like to make any comments. Is there anyone online that would like to make comments? And feel free to raise your hands or join in the chat. Okay, I'm not seeing any online. No? Okay, so no public comments. So we will move on to item number 2. And I'm going to tease our Director of Recreation for wearing a tie. I was super excited to not wear a tie today, but I'm glad to see that you're dressed up for us. I figured this is the Outdoor Adventure Commission. It's more outdoorsy, so that's why I was like, no tie today. But go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will take that into the next meeting with enthusiasm and not wear a tie. Yeah, and so is that presentation available and ready to go? What I thought I would do is just go over all of our, not all, but most of the bills that had a direct impact on outdoor recreation. Just go through them one by one. And so as I do that, if you have additional information, insights, or if you were the sponsor of any of the bills, feel free to chime in and give some additional. So let's see, let's go to next slide and then the one after. So I thought I would just start with our appropriations. There were 2 requests that we made. And the first one is to fund a position for outdoor recreation education. So we're hiring a specialist. We did get this funded from both the OHV restricted account and the boating restricted account, $50,000 from each. And that position is going to be recruited probably in about 6 weeks or so. We'll begin that process. And we're excited about that. It's something that we felt like we've been lacking for a while, to have an individual that's just strictly dedicated to education on outdoor recreation issues, mostly boating and OHV. And then the second funding request was for our trail crew, basically an expansion on the success that we had with our trail crew this past season. So we'll have 3 additional crews, and we're going to regionally place them. We got $400,000 from the OHV restricted account, and then $900,000 from the Outdoor Adventure Infrastructure restricted account. So it's a $1.3 million request that we got, and so right now our trail folks, Mike and Jaden, are working on a plan to start filling positions and getting locations for the trail crews to be regionally based. We've got a kind of a north, a south, an east, and a west plan so far, and probably take us some time to get them fully staffed, but I think there's plenty of work to be done out there once they get in place. Next slide. SB 112, that was the Aquatic Invasive Species Amendments Bill by Senator Sandel. Just rearranged how we were charging boat registration, charging money during boat registration for mitigation of invasive species. If you'll recall, the way that this was originally set up to fund the interdiction fund, DWR's fund for dealing with quagga mussels and the inspection stations and everything, was tied to boating registration, which was not allowable under federal code. So we just rearranged things so that DWR will charge a fee, and then we will reduce our fees, but basically we're still funding it in large degree. And then also with that comes a decal. That decal will be required to be placed on all vessels before they can operate or launch on a public waterway in Utah. Any questions on that one? Pretty straightforward. Next slide. HB 55, that was Representative Albrecht's off-highway vehicle registration requirements. exempted snowmobiles from the license plate requirement. Right now, well, starting in January, the DMV has been issuing license plates for all OHVs except for snowmobiles and motorcycles. We've seen a few of those out, and they'll become more and more prominent as time goes on. Clarified and enabled the DMV to collect that fee for the plates, and then gave us some rulemaking authority for education and training. What it does really, in effect, is open the door for us to kind of resume or I guess, start a hands-on training for youth in OHV education and safety. That one was a retroactive. It's effective immediately on some portions of it, and then goes back to January 1st as far as the license plate requirement. Next slide. HB 384, and so this one was a big bill. It defined a little bit more or clarified what is outdoor recreation infrastructure, named several things specifically, trails, trailheads, a lot of different things that probably needed to be clarified just in terms of funding infrastructure needs. It also set levels of funding from the Outdoor Adventure Infrastructure Restricted Account. 15% goes to state parks for their capital projects. 22% goes to outdoor recreation for grants, your grant. And then 53% goes to outdoor recreation through this body and the legislature for quote unquote larger outdoor recreation infrastructure projects. Also restructures this body, includes a representative from state parks. Welcome, Scott. I saw that he was online. It also added an additional member from Utah League of Cities and Towns. Instead of having a shared person, each the league and the Association of Counties each has 2 members. So. And then it also restructured how our boating and OHV representatives are fulfilling their positions. They're advisory now in nature versus a voting member. It also codified the UCORE program, Utah Children's Outdoor Recreation Program, which we're really excited about. Enables us to dedicate specific efforts and funding towards children's outdoor recreation programming. And then finally, there was an appropriation piece. There was a $5 million appropriation to state parks for their capital projects, an $8 million appropriation to outdoor rec grants, and then $19 million to the OAC and the legislature. So with that, Representative Stenquist, if you've got any additional information or comments on this one?
Yeah, this was an important piece of legislation that we talked about prior to the session, although there were a lot of changes going on even as it moved from the House to the Senate. A couple things on the UCORE program. I think one of the last minute changes that we made is there was some funding in there for it, but that got taken out. Is that right? If I recall?
Yes.
Okay.
There was $200,000, I believe.
Yeah. So I would mainly say, and all of these percentages, as I was working with the fiscal analysts as well as leadership and others and getting input, I don't think those percentages add up to 100%.
They're 90.
But it's, yeah, we basically allocated 90%, but these are minimums.
Right, it says at least.
At least. So at some point, we may say, hey, you know what, this year let's put a little bit more into UORG or a little bit more toward large projects or state parks or something like that. So there's a little bit of leeway there rather than allocating all of it. And it started out as fixed numbers, but then we switched it to percentages. I think probably the biggest thing I want to point out with this is really part of the goal was to try and make sure that there's a process for ranking and prioritizing projects according to some criteria. So my thinking is that particularly as we finalize our strategic plan this year, that then can provide the guiding document and the criteria that then this commission can then look at to prioritize projects, but those projects we'll be acting, so this body will be acting as an advisory committee to the legislature, similar to what we do with like transportation advisory committees. And so, so we'll have the opportunity to look at projects, rank and prioritize them. Of course, it'll be forwarded to the legislature for the actual appropriation. But that's going to necessitate that we have some sort of a process for people to submit projects, to let people know that, hey, there's this money available, what would you like to do, you know, like, so there has to be, I think, an awareness effort made and some sort of, you know, rules in place and a process put in place so that those projects can be brought toward this, before this commission, some time frame on, you know, when's the deadlines and at what point are we reviewing those projects, all those kind of things, similar to what we do with UR grants, but we just have to set up something similar for this project process. Yeah, Tara.
I was just wondering, the 900,000 that are supposed to go for the trails crew out of this, is that, I mean, it's somewhat accounted for with that as well?
No, so there's nothing in this bill that goes toward a trail crew, and our discussions were basically as, you know, so as we allocate money to a project, that could include the labor that goes along with the project, but nothing specific for operational costs or FTEs. That's the thing that, at least my vision with really this is allocating how the outdoor recreation, outdoor adventure restricted account money can be spent, that percentage of sales tax revenue that goes into that restricted account. So the vision for that restricted account is that money is basically going toward capital projects, but could also include maintenance, but not necessarily for operational costs.
Okay.
Right.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yes, Vicki.
So, these are basic questions,
Mhm.
because I wasn't as close to the discussion. Is that the percentage allocation?
Sorry, Chairman, we're unable to get that for the record. Could you please check make sure that microphone is unmuted,
Push your
glowing
button.
green?
There we go.
Okay.
Okay.
So the percentage allocations and then the appropriation of 5, 8, and 19, are those additive?
So, so the percentages are kind of ongoing, like every year, that's the percentage of the restricted account. So as the restricted account presumably grows, those dollar amounts would grow. So the dollar amounts at the bottom, the 5, the 8, and the 19 million, that's what's anticipated for this fiscal year.
Okay, that is the 15%. The 5
Yes,
is
those are the
this year's 15%. 8 is this year's 22%.
Right, because
Okay.
because it allocates, right now they're estimating at about $35 million in that restricted account, and so that's where that percentage breakdown comes out to.
Okay, excellent. And again, the fund is created by a set-aside of
Of general sales tax revenue.
specific NAICS codes?
No,
Oh, general sales.
that was my original bill from last year I was looking at, but we ended up just doing a carve-out of all general sales tax revenue.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a percent of all general sales tax
Yes.
revenue?
I don't
1%.
remember exactly what
It's 1%.
1%, okay.
1% of all, okay.
Right. Yep. And
Thank you, and congratulations. That's
thanks.
a really great. I mean,
Yeah, I
when you
think
think about where we started,
this is very significant.
It's
Yes,
amazing.
to not only, well, I mean, last year certainly having that dedicated carve out for recreation, that's huge. But then putting some structure around, okay, this is how that money is going to be spent and what the priority is going to be, and how, you know, the process for how it's going to be prioritized, I think was really important too. It's not just a pot of money for people to go out and try to grab money and spend it on things.
that was kind of a question I had is, you know, I know you get approached a lot for a lot of different RFA ideas. How do you see those types of requests connecting with this process?
Since the ultimate appropriation is up to the legislature, I guess you never know what the legislature is ultimately going to do. And I hope that especially if this commission is if we're doing our job, and really vetting projects and sending them to the legislature. Hopefully the legislature will take our recommendations seriously as they dole out those appropriations. But there could be other people that come along and say, here's an RFA, I'd like to pull some money out of this. That's certainly a possibility that could happen. I think there is in statute, I have to look, and maybe this is something that we could add additional language to in the future, is to specify, even if it's RFA, like this is the money, and I think that's, so part of the definitions is what outdoor recreation infrastructure means, so that people come along and they want an RFA to build, it's just they want some money for some random projects. At least there's something in statute that says, no, this restricted account, here's the criteria, it has to at least fall into this bucket of outdoor recreation infrastructure. Hopefully there's enough guardrails in statute.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good move.
Yeah.
I've seen other restricted accounts that didn't have that type of language get very broadly defined and used. So I think that was needed, and this is an amazing piece of legislation that I think we're all gonna see some really cool results out of going forward.
Yeah, I'm excited about it. Thanks.
All right. So again, just to clarify, this is from the Outdoor Adventure Infrastructure Restricted Account, which is the 1% sales tax. So next slide. Okay, so HB 93, Outdoor Recreation Modifications by Representative Albrecht. This one did a couple of fairly minor things, increased the amount that may be used from the unencumbered amount, and that was something that as I looked back at HB 384, I think that's probably a good qualifier to have in this piece. It might be something worth considering in hindsight for the outdoor adventure percentages, but it does say the unencumbered amount in the outdoor recreation infrastructure account. So this is the one that's TRT funded. So it used to be that we could get 5% from the outdoor recreation infrastructure restricted account. Now that has increased to 15% to use towards the RRI, the Recreation Restoration Infrastructure Grant. So increased that amount, which is a really good thing. And then also made it so that those grants are available to state agencies and federal agencies, which I think we'll see some I think we've already seen some applications, or at least ideas from applications that when this takes effect, we'll have overall more applicants and a broader range of projects to choose from and prioritize. Next slide. This bill was a bit of a surprise. It started early in the session, HB 200. It just made a kind of a technical change and removed the word transport. And the way that the sponsor framed this was when she made her presentation, said that right now, if you're driving down I-15 with your OHV that was not registered, that you could be pulled over, get a ticket, have it impounded and so forth, which could be true in certain circumstances. Anyway, we had a good dialogue with her, and we were able to at least maintain some ability for our rangers to be able to make contacts outside of just on the trail, because she wanted to just remove the word transport, which would create situations for us and for our rangers where they would have to basically not be able to enforce OHV registration other than if they were on the trail observing them in operation. So she agreed to add the place or cause to be placed language into the statute, which I think still allows us to do our job, and then still provides a little bit of protection and reasonableness for the user. So a little bit of a change, but effectively it probably won't mean a whole lot. Just have to alter the way we do business out there on the trailheads. Next slide. All right, this is HB 224, Outdoor Recreation Initiative, another one from Representative Stenquist. It created a new initiative called the Recreation Coordinated Investment Initiative, and it was modeled after the successes that we've seen here in DNR with the Watershed Restoration Initiative, and based on the concept of shared stewardship, which those two programs in the Division of Forestry, Fire and State Lands, and in DNR as a whole have had a really huge success just in terms of getting funding and attracting private and nonprofit funding to be able to leverage with state funds to get a lot of really good work on the ground in watersheds specifically. So this initiative will enable us to enter into partnership agreements with recreation management entities, local governments, and have a similar working relationship to be able to leverage funds and get work done in a cooperated way. So anything to add on that one?
You know, sometimes as a legislator, we have all sorts of ideas, and some of them are good and some of them are bad. And we have, sometimes it's hard to know whether or not the legislation that we pass is actually going to be helpful. This is one of those that I don't know exactly what's going to come of this, but I'm hopeful that there's some really good opportunities that this opens up, and really I think it's on your department to work on these agreements and see what you can come up with. But based on what's happened with the Watershed Restoration Initiative, I think hopefully it's got that kind of potential. I mean, maybe it doesn't have that kind of potential, because I think that's been very successful. If we could even duplicate that to a small extent, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, WRI has had the advantage of having some really well-funded nonprofits like Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, Wild Turkey Federation, Trout Unlimited, and so forth. We may be able to get some similar partnerships like that, but overall, I think it's a good thing, and at least formalizes that idea and makes it into an initiative. And we'll be working on putting a staff member in charge of that program and seeing what we can make of it.
Great.
I guess one other question, just on details with the recreation initiative. If there were to be funding to come out of that to do a partnership agreement, where do you envision that funding coming from?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because let's say that the Division of Rec negotiates some shared stewardship agreement on some campground or some asset, some trail somewhere, that includes, you know, maybe there's a partnership with the Forest Service, and you kick in some money from some federal funds, we'll kick in some state funds, but that's going to be contingent on the funding side. So then I think those projects would be brought back to this commission for prioritization, and then forwarded on to the legislature for funding out of the recreation.
Out of the 19 million.
Yes, yeah,
okay.
that was envisioned that 19 million, that could include these types of, the funding for these types of initiatives.
Okay.
Yep.
That's what I was thinking. Thank you.
All right, next. HB 299. This was I guess I would say interesting, a little bit frightening at times when we first started into the process of what this was going to require us to do, but I think it ended up in a really good place. It basically created a new grant for the division. It's a Utah Boating Grant, and it's funded through a half of all boating registration or the uniform fees of vessels that are under 31 feet. So that includes almost all, not almost all, but a great majority of all of the vessels in the state. Half of all the registration fees will go into this account, and that account will then fund a grant program. So we have some rulemaking to do. It does not take effect until January of 2024, but we've got, again, some rulemaking, probably some staff responsibilities to move around, and some capacity issues to look at there. But it's exciting. This is something that we've looked at and wanted for a long time. We've seen a lot of success with the OHV grant that's funded in a similar way. And I think there's a lot of need out there for boating infrastructure. The other thing that this bill did was a change that was negotiated on the Senate side for making certain stern riding activities legal. Traditionally, and I think in most places, it's illegal to ride on the stern of a boat for a couple of reasons. Number one, the danger of the prop, and then number two, carbon monoxide poisonings have happened in the past. People have lost their lives when they've been overcome by CO, and they fall in, and we've also had people cut by props. So in these very specific circumstances here, where it's a V drive that's under the hull, the boat's going under 15, and the 16-year or older rider, plus a surf pipe type of exhaust, you can now ride on the stern. So it's a small concession, and I think overall not a harmful thing. I don't think we'll see any incidents as a result of this, and probably a little more flexibility for the boating public. Anything else on that one, Ty? Next. There were a couple of other bills that we would have liked to have seen passed. HB 274 was Adopt the Outdoors from Representative Owens, an additional program that I think would have blended really well with the coordinated outdoor recreation investment initiative. Didn't pass, as well as HB 444, we called it, the RV registration requirements, which would have given us another grant, a grant that would be funded by an additional fee paid by those that register RVs in the state of Utah. Also didn't pass. There were some concerns just on how the fee was structured, but and then several RFAs that came forward, and none of those were funded. But any insights on?
Well, HB 444 was the only bill that I had that failed the session, so my batting average was still pretty good even with that. And but I'll work on it over the summer to make sure that I have the right data behind it and bring it back next year.
Yeah, I think there was generally some good support for the concept. Yeah. Maybe just a few concerns on how the fee was structured.
There were some people that got spooked on the House floor about, oh, we're adding more fees, it's taxes, it's all that kind of stuff, and and I didn't have all my ducks in a row with everything else I was working on to answer all the questions. I didn't. With how Representative Snyder's bill went, I thought it wouldn't be that difficult, but there were some concerns, and so I'll just retool it for next year.
Okay, well, we'll look forward to it.
I think some help, make sure it's ready. Yeah, Vicki.
What were the concerns on Representative Owens' bill?
I'm not exactly sure. I think it may have passed the House but failed in the Senate, maybe? I don't know.
Yep, exactly. I did talk to a few of the House members that voted against it, even though it passed the House. And the concerns that were brought up were, number one, just adding another program. And it might have been a little bit of partisan thought process there as well. Adding another government program. Another concern was brought up of because part of this Adopt the Outdoors was giving corporate entities an opportunity to basically adopt an outdoor destination, trailhead, or whatever. And there was a concern of putting corporate brands on our outdoor recreation entity or opportunities. So I don't know that it. I think this one honestly could have passed if it had a little bit more time, but it passed the House and then just got. And it made it actually onto the reading board or the second reading calendar for the Senate, and then when they shuffled, it just didn't make it back on. So, all right, well, that's it. Not every single thing that affected us, but those that included us and or affected us in the most direct manner. So, any others that need to be brought up or need to be discussed? All right. Well, thank you. I think it was a really successful session. We had a lot of great things, and thanks in large to your efforts, Representative Stenquist. So we appreciate it.
Thanks. I think it was a good session all around, and then I also will mention, because I think most people here are aware of the new tour caucus that we started, and we had some, we had a kickoff up at Snowbird. We had some other meetings during the session of the tour caucus, and that were, we had some pretty good. Not super attendance, but some good attendance actually for a new caucus. And there are plans to do things over the summer, and I think this is something that's going to build in momentum and really help. That part of the intention is to get all of the legislators a little bit more educated and understanding about all the different issues related to outdoor recreation. And it was surprising to me, as we had a different presentation about all the different various ways and different things we talked about with recreation. Like the last meeting we talked about agricultural tourism and those opportunities. I mean, just things that I hadn't even thought of. And I think that getting just more information and helping educate the legislature and policymakers about all the different issues, which are vast, when it comes to outdoor recreation, I think is going to be really helpful. So I'm excited about that as well.
Yeah, I'm super excited about that. I foresee it becoming bigger, better, and rivaling the rural caucus.
That would be fantastic. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions or comments on this item before we move on? We will definitely invite, especially on the caucus events. I think there will be some large events. In probably like the rural parts parts of the state, southern Utah particularly, in probably May and September timeframes. But even during interim meetings, particularly in the summer, I think we'll take the opportunity to go and visit some local assets around here, and I could see us like going up and checking out the Bonneville Trail System or Corner Canyon or some of the other things that are being done, Jordan River, something like that. So I think there'll be opportunities, for like smaller excursions to invite people out to as well. So if you have thoughts about that, hey, like we could invite legislators out to go, I don't know, like I went paragliding the whole idea for the Tour Caucus came from Senator Andre going out. He and I went out paragliding, and that it came to us as we were sitting up on the bluff doing that. So anything like that, I think would be, if you have ideas, we could put that together.
Yeah, I think that's where, like you said, that's where the idea for the caucus was born, is in the outdoor venue, doing the outdoor activity. It's funny how much actual good work and the best ideas come from being in the setting that you're trying to plan for and do the work for. So
Yeah.
I think there's a meeting on Wednesday.
Yeah, Wednesday or Thursday. And yeah, exactly. We were sitting up there with the wind on our face and everything thinking, there's just no substitute for getting out of a committee room and actually experiencing what's going on the ground. So let's create some more opportunities for that. And that was the idea. Okay, if there are no other comments, let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is our strategic planning update from Dr. Smith. Go ahead.
Thanks, Representative Stanquist. Give me 1 minute to share my screen here. Sorry, I seem to have having a few issues here.
All right.
Okay, let me.
I have a quick question. Did we need to have an approval of minutes on the agenda? We're going to do that in April. Oh, do that in April. Okay. For our January meeting as well? Okay, that's fine. Thanks.
Hey, look at that.
All right, there we go. Yeah.
Thanks for being patient.
Sure, no problem.
As soon as I master Zoom, you guys change it back on me. Today I want to give an update on where we are in the process of developing the strategic plan, our analysis and work that has gone into the plan so far, but really spend the bulk of the day talking about this comparison of outdoor recreation funding, management, and general support across the entire Western U.S. This was one of the fundamental tasks within the agreement where we're working on developing some comparative statistics and measures that we can actually see how Utah stacks up relative to other states with regards to investments in outdoor recreation. If you recall our last OAC meeting in November, we talked about our funding analysis where we really took a deep dive into how outdoor recreation was funded within Utah. Today, we're presenting on the second stage of that where we kind of start to look up and out more broadly across the Western U.S. and see how Utah compares to other states. And then we'll talk a little bit about the regional workshops that we'll have upcoming later in the spring, starting in May. I think you've seen a couple calendar invites come across already about those. But just to kind of kick us off, to start up, to refocus of where we are in the strategic planning process, there's a variety of different tasks that we had involved in the analysis work. The first was to develop the statewide outdoor recreation asset database. That was the compilation of all the data that we had publicly available to us, as well as all of that was generated during those fall workshops. We have that completed, and we'll be spending most of the time next month talking through that because it's going to play a pivotal role in the data that we're taking back out to stakeholders in the spring workshop series. So that piece is complete. I'll save it for next month for the next meeting. The compiling data on outdoor recreation programs and information within the state, we presented on that and had that complete in November. And the third task on that list was projecting future outdoor conditions of outdoor recreation resources, programs, and information. That's a piece that we have ongoing and probably won't hear much about that until after the spring workshops are complete. The fourth task was analyzing differences between outdoor recreation in Utah and comparable states, the report that we'll be taking the bulk of the time today to talk about. We're a little bit ahead of schedule there in having this nearly complete and ready to share with the OAC today. The regional stakeholder engagement workshops, we had the fall series, and we're getting ready for the spring series. We'll wrap those up, we anticipate, by the end of June this year. And so that's the bulk of what we had committed to in our analysis work. But to jump right in with the comparative analysis of Utah relative to the other Western states, we started to look at all the metrics that we could possibly find comparing Utah to the 10 other Western states. And we really basically defined this as kind of everything from Montana, Colorado, and New Mexico westwards, including California, but excluding Hawaii and Alaska. The specific measures that we looked at and that we'll be presenting on today, the economic contributions of outdoor recreation to the state's economies, how outdoor recreation is managed by the state agencies, so what entities are actually in play within the different states, the use fees that are levied to engage in outdoor recreation, that includes state park fees as well as registration fees for off-highway vehicles and boating. Differences in funding and management of state park systems. So we did take a deep dive into state parks, given that they are a pivotal role of how states provide outdoor recreation opportunities at the state level. And then we took also a look at the state funding opportunities, or the state funding for infrastructure and management. So I want to walk through these and specifically talk about the recommendations that came out of this report. And Carly had shared it with everybody earlier today, and I know you haven't had a chance to read through it, but I'm going to really structure the presentation primarily around the recommendations and then the data that go into standing up those recommendations. Before we get into the specific recommendations, I wanted to talk about the broad state of how the different Western U.S. states differ with regards to not only their size, but their economic contributions that come from outdoor recreation. So here's some just basic statistics that we pulled together. We've laid out all 11 western states with regards to population, the actual land mass of the states. You see, unsurprisingly, California is kind of the outlier with regards to population. State size, California also the biggest state in the western U.S., Utah. So maybe surprisingly, one of the smaller western states when you actually look at the total land mass. Still very huge, but we're talking about very big states. The proportion of state-owned land, Utah has one of the higher proportions, the third most state-owned land of all western states, with only New Mexico and Arizona having higher percentages. About 9% of the state is owned and managed by state agencies. And then federal agencies, you can see there at the bottom. I don't know if I can get that to disappear. There we go. Utah, 66% of the state managed by federal agencies, with the other states predominantly having less of their land under federal ownership or management. Nevada is the only one with the higher proportion of federal ownership. State budgets, again, we kind of just laid those out, comparing Utah relative to the other states. Utah has a state budget that's kind of right in the mix. When you look at the total state budget, that's that top line graph. The general state budget or general expenditures per capita, Utah is again towards the middle to lower half of the ranking, with half of the states above Utah. We also looked at state park agency operating budgets. California, on a per nominal basis, has a huge head start on the rest of the West. Utah is kind of right there in the mix. But when you look at it as a proportion of the total state budget, Utah is only second behind Colorado with regards to how much state revenues the state park system is bringing in relative to the state budget. So a large portion of the operations and management of the state park system is generated by user fees, and that is a larger portion of the state budget than most other western states. All right, some more interesting statistics here on the proportion of the state's economy that is generated by outdoor recreation. So this is the proportion of the entire state's economy that is generated by outdoor recreation activities. And you see here in the second graph, this is the number, and these data come from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. This is the most recent data that come from the outdoor recreation satellite account, a comparative analytical process that the Bureau of Economic Analysis goes to compare all of the states, not just the western states, but we pulled out the western states here. Utah has about 2.7% of our state GDP generated by outdoor recreation activity. Other states that maybe are slightly less economically diversified have a slightly higher proportion. Montana, Wyoming, and Idaho are the only states that have a higher proportion of their state GDP coming from outdoor recreation specifically. Recreation employment, Utah has about 4% of all state employment is directly attributable to outdoor recreation activities. And again, Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado are the only states with slightly higher proportions. So just some statistics there to kind of set the stage with regards to the role of outdoor recreation within the state's economies. Probably the more telling statistic, and one that you probably haven't seen yet, is the role of different outdoor recreational activities in the state's outdoor recreation economy. So we took just the number of the total economic contribution from outdoor recreation activities across the 11 western states, and then look at that relative proportion that was contributed by different outdoor recreation activities. Utah is on the lower left-hand corner. We put all 11 western states up here. In Utah, the biggest economic contributor as far as a specific recreational activity goes is snow sports. So roughly 30% of the state's outdoor recreation economy is generated by snow sports, and only slightly behind snow sports is boating and fishing and RVing, which both have about 20% of the state's GDP generated by them.
Does that include like sales of boats and RVs as well?
It does. So
It does, okay.
this,
Yeah,
this
that makes sense.
includes
Those are big ticket items.
yeah,
so that
and
makes
that's
sense, yeah.
primarily the distribution that you'll see here. Utah is one of only two other western states, 3 in total, that have snow sports as the primary economic driver for outdoor recreation. Colorado and Wyoming both do as well. And most have a similar distribution where the motorized outdoor recreation activities are the ones being the primary driver of the outdoor recreation economy. And that's exactly why, is because they are the biggest ticket items. They're the ones that are really driving vehicle sales, as well as per trip expenditures.
My belief is that the snow activities would include snowmobiling, is that correct?
It's all winter-based
Yes.
activities, so that includes
Okay.
skiing and snowmobiling.
Perfect, that's what
Yeah.
just confirmed.
So just the distribution here with regards to specific activities. The other more non-motorized and more passive outdoor recreation activities still contribute a significant portion, although it's relatively marginal when you can consider it relative to boating, RVing, and snow sports. All right, so this first point of comparison that we looked at was how outdoor recreation is managed by different state agencies. And the recommendation that came out of this comparison was basically looking at the administrative structures for how outdoor recreation has been managed by either state park systems, offices, or divisions of outdoor recreation, divisions of natural resources generally that also manage a lot of hunting and fishing activities. Primarily, the recommendation here is that there's a wide variety in how outdoor recreation is managed across the 11 western states. Utah is somewhat unique in that we have everything now under one roof in the new division of outdoor recreation, or most of everything under one roof with the new division of outdoor recreation. But most other states have individual state park entities that are relatively independent. Their outdoor offices of outdoor recreation might have been initially established under the governor's office, the same way that Utah's was, but they relatively have a very wide variety of structures, and we can't really say which structure is better. But the only recommendation that we came across, looking across the different functionings of the state park system, is that generally we would expect that having more alignment across state entities like state park systems and state offices of outdoor recreation would happen if those offices or those divisions are within one administrative home. So Utah generally is ahead of the curve here when it comes to actually having everything in one place. But generally we see across the western U.S. that there's only one other state, Colorado, that has a organizational administrative structure that helps to tie everything together, that works to organize the objectives and missions of state offices of tourism with Division of Outdoor Recreation and state parks, and maybe even with the operations and needs of individual counties and municipalities. So the Outdoor Adventure Commission is one of 2 that actually sits and spans these different interests and these different state land management agencies and these different needs. The recommendation that we have here, we looked a little bit and detail it in the report, the essential functioning and purpose of boards like the Outdoor Adventure Commission, and definitely would make the recommendation that these boards have much more success, they have much more longstanding value if they do see a purpose beyond just providing support for a strategic plan, but providing the direction of state investments on a yearly basis. And it seems like the state is heading in those directions. Representative Senquist just outlined this goal or the vision for the 53% of that outdoor recreation infrastructure restricted account being approved by projects that come before the Outdoor Adventure Commission. So that's definitely in line with what we're seeing here, is that if there is some mandate and discretionary control that the Outdoor Adventure Commission can have, that will give the commission more likely to be lasting in the future, have more purpose behind its existence beyond the strategic planning process. So the first recommendation there is that more centralized organizational structures would likely be more effective at developing and maintaining alignment across individual programs. So Utah is well ahead of the curve there. And we would assume that there's a lot of conversations between state parks, which is the only entity really outside of the traditional purview of what a division or office of outdoor recreation has managed. The recommendation that came out of this, secondly, is that what these individual programs are doing with regards to funding outdoor recreation infrastructure development, funding outdoor recreation maintenance, and developing education programs, is that tourism entities play a huge role in the outdoor recreation sphere, and primarily can play a huge role in educating and managing irresponsible recreation behavior. And only a few states, we looked across the tourism programs, Vicky's program, that have been developing responsible recreation messaging and disseminating this. And it's a huge component of what these offices of tourism are now doing. But the extent to which it's actually getting disseminated to line officers, state park managers on the ground is really the next step. So the recommendation here is for those states that have started to do it, primarily Utah, is to find ways to critically link all of the marketing and responsible recreation messaging that is being promoted and developed by offices of tourism to state land management agencies, primarily those land management agencies that are working one-on-one with visitors on a more daily basis. The third recommendation is develop more formal avenues of continued coordination, collaboration, and resource sharing between state agencies, programs, counties, municipalities, federal land management agencies. So this gets back to these need for these coordinating councils like the Outdoor Adventure Commission. These governing boards, if they're empowered, can help align agencies in their actions and their priorities. So it seems like if we move forward with the Outdoor Adventure Commission, their primary mandate being to make decisions about how to spend the outdoor recreation infrastructure restricted account dollars, or at least make recommendations to the state legislature, that gives the commission some defining vision. I'd also point out in this recommendation, we did make the note that this can and probably should include federal land management agencies. In even ex officio or non-voting member status, if these decisions are being made to spend tens of millions of dollars in outdoor recreation infrastructure management or programmatic planning every year, those decisions probably should be made at least with input, even if it's non-voting input, for recommendations to the state legislature with federal agencies involved in the room. So a specific recommendation here that the Outdoor Adventure Commission might want to consider is to actually have members from the Park Service, the BLM, and the Forest Service involved in the Outdoor Adventure Commission, if in no other capacity than as a ex officio or a non-voting member. And we'll remind the Outdoor Adventure Commission that the Office of Outdoor Recreation, precursor to the Division of Outdoor Recreation, did have an advisory council that did have a lot of different entities sitting on that board from federal agencies that did provide input into the state's actions. So that is a good recommendation, to at least have the federal presence involved in those discussions and those decisions of this commission as they move forward. Recommendation 4, states should consider creating and supporting technical assistance planning programs to support communities with developing comprehensive long-range recreation plans. So this really stems from the idea that outdoor recreation strategic plans at the state level can be very focused on these large projects and very high-level visioning efforts. This really creates a gap and a need for more local-level planning, and there needs to be a solid conduit between local-level needs filtering up to the state offices of outdoor recreation, and the state offices of outdoor recreation providing input into what resources are available as far as grants go, best practices, as far as managing outdoor recreation on a more daily basis. And this is primarily thinking about how the Division of Outdoor Recreation can support municipalities and counties, those entities that traditionally don't have and manage outdoor recreation through their formal mandate. The role we see here is one where we're not suggesting that the Division of Outdoor Recreation or even state offices of tourism need to recreate the wheel, but one where they can rely on the expertise of non-governmental organizations and state university partners to really create those opportunities for local planning assistance. Utah State University Extension, for example, has decades of experience in working for local planning support. And a great example that Vicky's office has developed over the last several years is partnering with Leave No Trace to develop all the responsible recreation messaging for the Office of Tourism. And that's a great example where we relied on external partner to develop that capacity without having to do it in-house. Next point of comparison is the use of fees for engaging in outdoor recreation. And here we really provided the first, I would say, systematic overview of recreation fees across the West. And this includes off-highway vehicle registrations, boating registrations, as well as state park entrance fees. Generally, again, lots of variation in how the states levy these fees. For example, in Montana, it's a one-time fee for when you register for your off-highway vehicle or your boat. It's notably more, whereas in Utah, we're kind of on par with those other states like Colorado, Washington, and Wyoming that have annual fees. So you can kind of see here where we stack up with having annual off-highway vehicle registration fees that are between $4 and $40, plus county fees and boat registrations that range anywhere between $43 to $700 plus, depending upon the type of boat you're registering. So we're generally within the mix with regards to the funding or the registration fees being levied on on off-highway vehicle registrations or on boats.
Can you clarify what's an AISB?
That's the aquatic invasive species
okay.
sticker. So
Yeah,
that's
the aquatic.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So, was there questions on?
Just one thing because of, hopefully this is, yeah, it's working now. Just because the law changes this year, we probably need to increase the Utah AIS fee, $20 for residents and $25 for non-residents.
And has that been, that's in place now?
It will be effective July 1 this year.
Okay. But generally no notable differences in registration fees across the western states. So here's one where our recommendation is that, if there's a maintenance backlog or a demand, an unmet, if there is a huge demand in how these off-highway vehicle fees or boating registration fees are being used, which doesn't seem to be the case within Utah, that's a pool that seems to be adequately meeting its need right now, that there's no real need to look towards increasing off-highway vehicle registration or boat registration fees within the state. But it does seem like a relatively simple solution as demand continues to grow and the burden on off-highway vehicle and boating programs continues to increase. So that was a recommendation there. If there are maintenance backlogs or need for more infrastructure or for off-highway vehicle and motorized boating, increasing registration fees or diverting a greater portion of fees to these seems like a relatively straightforward solution. The differences in funding for the management of state park systems, so looking specifically at state parks and how they're funded, Utah primarily has the structure where our state park system, at least the operational management of that state park system, is funded by user fees. Do have a small proportion that is generated from snowmobile registrations, off-highway vehicle and ATV registrations, as well as gift shop sales, visitor center sales, as well as concessionaire returns. So it's a relatively limited scope of revenue generation that the state park system has within Utah relative to other states. Another examples here is you can look and compare Colorado to Utah, and you see Colorado has essentially all the same mechanisms for funding state parks, with the addition of a gas tax that does go into support their state park system, as well as the lottery, which is a notable difference. Excuse me, not in Colorado, but that is in Oregon, and I thought it was in California too, but looks like not. So the general trend here is that Utah has a fairly small, narrow bandwidth to actually generate revenues for state park maintenance. So if we're getting additional increases in the amount that's going to capital improvements every year through the Outdoor Recreation Infrastructure Restricted Account, the state park system generally has few levers to pull when it comes to increasing the amount of operational funds that they have to actually maintain that infrastructure every year. So the recommendation here is that state park systems should consider all the options available to them as viable mechanisms to increase the diversity of revenue streams for supporting and maintaining a high level of service to visitors. And this might include increasing user fees, increasing license fees. We do see, I didn't show it here, it's included in one of our tables in the report, that there is a notable gap between resident and non-resident annual pass fees across the U.S. Some states have started to take an active role in increasing non-resident fees. Montana, in particularly, has a huge proportion, a huge price differential between residents and non-residents, and the other Western states seem to be lagging a little bit behind. The seventh recommendation is dedicated continual funding for outdoor recreation grant programs ensures administrative continuity and opportunities for grants. Again, a good example or recommendation where Utah is kind of somewhat ahead of the curve with these dedicated funding sources that are coming, like the outdoor recreation infrastructure restricted account. So that's a quick rundown. We have a lot more data on the comparisons of individual fees and the administrative structure of the 11 Western states, but I wanted to provide kind of a high-level overview today and really focus on these recommendations. Is there any general feedback as we refine this, or thoughts on those 7 recommendations?
I have a question. Really good information. It's awesome. Question I have is about registered OHVs and registered boats. Is there any data here, state by state, in terms of the number of those registrations and number per capita?
I think we do have that. We should have it for Utah. And I'm not sure for the other Western states. We do not have it included in here now, but we can look into it and see if we can add it as we move forward.
It'd be interesting to see. Okay, thank you.
Generally, the takeaways from this report is that, by and large, Utah is leading the way when it comes to outdoor recreation funding, programmatic development. But the key developments really need to happen with regards to how the Outdoor Adventure Commission is structured and how we provide more conduits for feedback from local governments in maintaining planning assistance and understanding how to actually apply and get support that's coming from the state legislature with regards to these annual appropriations that the OAC is giving the mandate to make decisions over. So these kind of vertical connections between Utah League of Cities and Towns constituents and the Utah Association of Counties, and how they can actually continually reify their needs or make sure that their needs are voiced to the Outdoor Adventure Commission. And then these more horizontal linkages between the state and the federal agencies that are, well, particularly within Utah, managing a huge proportion of our outdoor recreation assets as a state.
This is really great information. Any more questions on this item? Yeah.
I'm just curious, in your comparisons here of states, were there any states that stood out, or examples that stood out of also, I mean, you mentioned NGOs in here, but the private sector contributing to resources or messaging, or, kind of going back to, we talked about Representative Owen's bill, right, of like the potential there. Were there any good examples in any of these comparative states where there were programs like that were working, where the private sector was able to participate in the improvement of the recreation experience?
I haven't seen that as far as any explicit policies where the private sector has gotten involved. It seems to be that most of those developments have happened outside of formal policy structures, where the private industry is making the capital investments themselves with the benefit of their employees as the byproduct or what they want to see happen. So it's not happening, at least from my perspective, in any formal mechanism. It's more happening kind of indirectly by the private industry doing it themselves. So,
and I ask that again because, that, like, Representative Owen's bill, but also like the shared stewardship plan, right? Like that, the other bill that's, not necessarily private sector, but yes, non-government, organizations that, how can we get them involved in a shared stewardship type plan? Like, Representative Stenquist is kind of paving the way for that potentially, but we don't know exactly what that looks like yet. So anyway, that's why I was asking, just looking for examples and how that could work.
Right.
I have.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I really like this directionally. I have a lot more questions about certain parts of it, but it feels to me like this is starting to create the infrastructure that we need to be successful. And I'm particularly pleased by your recommendation. We really want to do more of the stewardship, marketing, storytelling, collaboration, and so that all fits with our vision. Can you go back to the slide with the Outdoor Adventure Commission? Yeah. And each of the respective entities in its circle. Yeah. And I don't know for sure exactly what this means. I feel like I need to understand it better. The caution that I think we would all have is about making, like I look at our office, which is well, each of us have different reporting lines, different boards, and we don't want to create layers of governance that interfere with our ability to be nimble. And so I don't know if I guess I don't understand enough about this recommendation, but I would want to have further discussion to understand that better and make sure that we're not creating layers of decision makers that we might regret.
Yeah, and I think the primary purpose of kind of highlighting the role of the Outdoor Adventure Commission in aligning the mission and vision of different state agencies or offices is really to eliminate the redundancies that might be present. So we're seeing offices of tourism develop more and more educational messaging, and also a mandate on the Division of Outdoor Recreation, primarily within the off-highway vehicle and boating programs, to develop education programming. And so the recommendation here, and what we can detail, is just to think about the Outdoor Adventure Commission as a point of coordination, so that all the materials that, for example, the Leave No Trace has developed for your office can be replicated or reused for Division of Outdoor Recreation programming needs, and so that we're not having a duplication of efforts between multiple agencies that are both touching on similar aspects of outdoor recreation management. So I would say it's kind of quite the opposite of just adding a layer of bureaucracy. It's just thinking about the OAC as a point of alignment, a way to align the administrative goals of different programs.
Excellent. I think that helps a lot to understand. And I think we can all, there are examples in the last 6 months where if we had had a more clear mission from Outdoor Adventure Commission, we might have avoided some redundancies in messaging and so forth. So this is all very interesting.
All right.
So moving forward,
There's one question. Scott Strong has a question. Got his hand up.
Go ahead, Scott.
Thank you, Jason. I just wanted to thank Dr. Smith for his work on this. I did have a few follow-up questions that I'd like to talk to him about in regards to state parks. So if we can just connect on that, that would be great. A couple of clarifying factors about just fees, how other park systems work, as well as the out-of-state fees. We've made some adjustments, and I'd love to update the information you've got in your report. So thank you.
great, thanks, Scott. We'll for sure follow up.
Any other questions or comments?
Just one. I think it was your first slide, maybe second. had the basic missions of or the right there.
Okay.
I think. Is that the one? Nope. Before that, sorry. One more. Maybe it was the ag. Anyway, maybe it's just semantics or word choice, but there was reference to analyzing Utah and its outdoor recreation opportunities, and then comparable states. I guess I would object to the use of the word comparable because it's my job. No need to change it. I was just kidding.
Yeah, we definitely, I think that we have few states that fully match up to everything that we have to offer. It's fantastic.
Well, the only other
Okay.
thing I was going to mention is we're gearing up for the spring workshop series, in which we're going to be convening everybody that we had at our fall workshops in hopefully different locations around the state, but obviously within the same regions, highlighting some of the trends that came out of the big mapping exercises, as well as some of the specific projects and priorities that came out of the very good discussions that we had facilitated at those meetings. And so we've sent some dates that I think Carly had sent around as potential for the spring outdoor recreation strategic planning workshops. And the division would have to correct me here if we have any of these finalized yet. But I believe I saw a couple of invites that went out this morning, and these are the only two that we have finalized. Okay, so those are the 2 dates for the ones that are finalized. And Carly sent out the other dates. So we're working on those. The next meeting that we have at about this time next month, we'll walk through the results from the workshops last fall, as well as talk about the structure and how we're planning to organize these workshops for May and June.
Okay, that's great information, and certainly anyone from the commission is invited to attend as many of these workshops as you would like, as well as I think we'll be, obviously, and we'll be inviting stakeholders that we did from last time as well, including local government officials and others from those regions to attend those workshops. And they were very productive last year, and we learned a lot, and so this will be it'll be interesting to go back, particularly, and so to be clear, we'll have kind of like a draft plan with us as that we'll be presenting the information as we go through these workshops to get additional feedback. Is that the idea?
As far as the full strategic plan, we'll have specific recommendations and results from the individual regions that we walk through, but we won't have a full final draft plan to share with everybody at those workshops.
Okay, and then when do we think we'll have a draft plan then?
Well, we've had a couple of discussions with the division about the recreation about how they would like to kind of roll that out. We're anticipating having that done by June or July, and then how we want to have public comment on that plan before or after the OAC votes on it and approves it. So June or July is kind of the tentative target for having that complete. And then the extent to which we have public input beyond that is still something that we're working through.
So these workshops in May and June could also help inform and refine that plan.
Yeah, that would be the mindset, is that we didn't want to have the plan drafted and then have a workshop essentially to present it. It would be more to continue to refine a lot of the ideas that came from the fall workshops, which the fall workshops were much more focused on challenges and threats, and the spring workshops are going to be much more focused on policies and projects that can actually be implemented. So hopefully tearing up some of those discussions about how we actually evaluate potential projects that come before the OAC in the future.
Great. Let's go ahead.
The League of Cities and Towns mid-year conference starts on April 19th through the 21st. If the dates are set by then, it would be great to have a handout or a flyer that would go when everyone picks up their registration materials from the city perspective, so that they're aware of what to put on their calendars for May and for June. And then if there's anything else that you think would be helpful to share with a large group of city officials, right now would be the time to hurry and let the league staff know so that they could work in any announcements or save any time in the agenda.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, April 19th through the 21st
In St. George.
in St. George.
That's a really good point. I think that might be an opportunity to even evangelize some of these grant programs and new funding opportunities as well.
Yeah, so I think for Jordan, if the dates are set and there's a flyer ready that I can have them include in everyone's registration packet's great. Jason, if there's something from the division about, I know the outdoor, the UR grant just closed, but if there's others coming up that we have to make people aware of for the spring and summer, I'm happy to facilitate getting them in front of city people. I don't know when the Association of Counties has their conference.
The end of April-ish, and I'm going to be there.
Yeah, like the 25th through the 27th.
Oh, so like the following week?
Yep. Yep, here in Salt Lake at the Salt Palace.
That sounds a lot
Okay.
less fun.
Probably is.
There'll probably still be some good skiing opportunities in late April, though, maybe. We'll see. Okay. Any other comments on this before we move on to the next item?
Can I just
Yes,
ask real
yeah, Vicki,
quickly?
go.
So on the recommendations that preceded this, what are we doing as next steps on those recommendations? And can you give me some context about where we are in the process on your overall recommendations regarding strategy?
Yeah, these are specific recommendations that will be included in the planning and analysis support work, not in the final plan itself. So we're envisioning that these are basically supporting or tiered documents that will all go into actually supporting the final vision for the outdoor recreation strategic plan, which will likely include several pillars that we're looking towards promoting as the key investment strategies or the key strategic direction for the Outdoor Adventure Commission and the state of Utah as a whole. And so these are smaller recommendations that will not be included in as much detail in the entirety of the plan, but they're ultimately kind of leading us in step towards that plan, or towards what those broader purposes might be, or what those pillars or visions might be for the strategic plan.
Okay. Let's move on to the next item in the agenda then. Public involvement discussion. I don't know who's planning on leading this discussion. I should know this, but I don't.
Kind of just a joint, I think you've kind of already talked about
Yeah.
it just in terms of public involvement with the plan.
Okay, so is this to discuss how the public's going to be involved once we have the draft plan? Is that we would have some sort of public input comment period later this summer and into the fall? Is that the idea?
Yeah, so we've discussed a couple of options and how we can do this. We could do it like post the plan and have an open public comment period where people do it virtually. The difficulty with structuring a process like that is that we have to respond to those plans to be, actually do our due diligence in preparing the plan in relative to public input. So it becomes a huge administrative burden in doing it that way. So there might be some other opportunities in how we structure it, with it being a virtual open house where we have the opportunity for presenting the plan and providing verbal feedback, or even doing a smaller set of workshops to present it actually in person. So we haven't committed to any one particular path now. I think our team's perspective would be, to not do it in a format where we provide it open to the public for general comment by everyone, but we figure out a way to have a focused discussion, likely a virtual discussion, where we present the plan, the goals, and the work that's went into it, and provide an opportunity for public input during that meeting. And then if there's any subsequent comments that people would like to submit, they can do it that way, but not to have the kind of de facto mode of providing input being, a public input form or an email that anybody can submit to. So I think our recommendation to the OAC is that if we want to have public involvement or public input on the final plan itself, that might be a separate workshop, or that might be a separate virtual forum where we can present the plan and field any questions at that time.
Yeah, that brings up some really good points. And, I would imagine that, if you just open it up to just broad input, you'd probably get a lot of, project-specific issues being raised, like, I'm really upset that we don't have a boat ramp over here in this area, that kind of stuff, that might be, kind of down in the weeds as opposed to addressing the larger strategic goals of the project. So I think, though, that there are some different options about presenting it maybe in a public forum, and certainly before this commission approves the plan, we would, even just in a public meeting here, invite comments from the public. That could be part of the process that we could consider, or just having like a separate workshop somewhere, whether it's in specific locations. Now, going through the effort of, we could go through another round of this later in the summer in these same areas if we wanted to, but of course then that's overhead too, to coordinate all of those meetings as well and get the word out. So I could see how that could be a lot of administration as well. It might be, so it seems a lot more efficient to consolidate that somehow. I don't have all the answers. I'm open to thoughts and input, and we don't necessarily have to make a decision right now. Just maybe think about how that process might look later this year. Thoughts at this point?
Yeah, I don't think we need to make a decision about it right now. I think I agree generally, though, with the idea that we want to probably err on the side of a larger, more collective or in-person or even virtual single meeting.
Or a hybrid meeting.
Yeah.
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 Sure. Yeah, Tom.
Just one thing to add. Of course, the outdoor retailer summer market's going to be here. I'm not sure how that could tie into this, but this could be a good meeting place or a venue, or a good opportunity to help with one of the initiatives we showed earlier today about where we can partner with different brands and bring that to the forefront.
It's a really good idea.
I like the idea of a hybrid, something where you walk through it and people can either be here or watching online, and then capturing comments there, and then perhaps the very next meeting of the commission that follows could also have a time limit set, like we'll take 30 minutes of comment, just so it's a little more robust. Mm-hmm. If there aren't, people with 30 minutes of comments, it doesn't have to sit here that long, but, yeah. And then consider that the opportunity closed unless someone wants to send in something formal and written to the chair.
Yeah. Yeah, those are good thoughts. Any other comments? Well, thanks everyone. This has been a really good meeting today. That's the last item on our agenda for today. I think our next meeting.
Can I
Yeah,
point
go
out
ahead.
something on our meeting dates?
Please.
So I took the Doodle survey, and I noticed that some of the dates that were suggested were May 1st and 2nd, which happens to be the governor's One Utah Summit. And I imagine some of this group is required to be there, and some might want to be there. And so maybe we should add some more dates to that Doodle poll. Or we can ask the governor if he'd like to do it in this room and not the.
Or maybe the other thing, what you said before.
Yeah.
I want to raise the hands of who's required and who wants to be there. I just want to see how that plays out.
Oh, you're so independent.
Now listen to this guy.
Yeah.
I already bought my ticket, not required.
So 8th or 9th, is that sounding good? My team can't do the 9th, can we? The afternoon. Okay, that's out. Okay. It's not looking for enough people. Looking at
What
the
if you just opened up
16th.
more dates, like, because I think when I took it, it was like May 1st, 2nd, 3rd, but maybe the 4th or 5th were opened up, or,
I don't know if the 27th of April would be an option as well.
it's got lots of flexibility. on the
NRCC
calendar.
tour, I wouldn't be able to.
Isn't that
Oh.
UAC?
Oh, that's UX. Oh, that's UX. Okay.
Oh.
Fourth and fifth is the program too with the Visit Salt Lake and Marshall.
Well,
Fourth and fifth is the BSL.
The business with purpose, but Natalie called me this week and said it's being canceled, so, or postponed.
so maybe should we just open up some more dates on the doodle poll and get more feedback that way? That seems to be an efficient way to go about it.
We'll work our schedule magic and,
Yeah.
resend out the doodle poll.
Okay. Thanks
All
so
of
much.
you are busy people.
Yes, indeed. And so we'll do our best to find a date that is least impactful to everyone. It may not be perfect for everyone, but appreciate everyone's time and participation today. Any other thoughts or comments before we adjourn? No? Thanks again. I'll take a final motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay. Vicky's made a motion non-debatable. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thanks, everyone.
Aye.